Episode 3, August the 2nd to the 4th, 1914. The Clock Ticks at the Admiralty, by the Right Honourable Winston Churchill, P.C.M.P., First Lord of the Admiralty, 1911 to 1915. Read by Nick Lucas. Mr. Winston Churchill was personally responsible for the preparedness of the British Navy in those fateful pre-war days. His task was magnificently fulfilled, and here he tells of his own part in the immortal chapter of British history up to the moment when hostilities opened. There was complete agreement in the Cabinet upon every telegram sent by Sir Edward Grey and in his handling of the crisis. But there was also an invincible refusal on the part of the majority to contemplate British intervention by force of arms should the Foreign Secretary's efforts fail and a European war begin. Thus, as the terrific week wore on and the explosions seemed inevitable, it seemed probable that a rupture of the political organism by which the country had so long been governed was also rapidly approaching. I lived this week entirely in the official circle, seeing scarcely anyone but my colleagues of the Admiralty and the Cabinet, and moving only to and fro across the Horse Guards between Admiralty House and Downing Street. Every day, as the telegrams arrived, showing the darkening scene of Europe, and the cabinets ended in growing tension, I pulled over the various levers which successively brought our naval organization into full preparedness. It was always necessary to remember that if peace was preserved, every one of these measures, alarmist in their character and involving much expense, would have to be justified to a liberal House of Commons. That assembly, once delivered from the peril, would certainly proceed upon the assumption that British participation in a continental struggle would have been criminal madness. Yet it was not practicable often to divert the main discussions of the Cabinet into purely technical channels. It was therefore necessary for me to take a peculiar and invidious personal responsibility for many things that had to be done when their turn came. I had also to contemplate a break-up of the governing instrument. Judged by reports and letters from members, the attitude of the House of Commons appeared most uncertain. At the Cabinet, I demanded the immediate calling out of the Fleet Reserve and the completion of our naval preparations. I based this claim on the fact that the German Navy was mobilizing, and that we must do the same. The Cabinet, who were by no means ill-informed on matters of naval organization, took the view, after a sharp discussion, that this step was not necessary for our safety, as mobilization affected only the oldest ships in the fleet, and that our main naval power was already in full preparedness for war and the fleet in its war station. I replied that though this was true, we needed the Third Fleet ships, particularly the older cruisers, to fulfill the roles assigned to them in our war plan. However, I did not succeed in securing their assent. On Saturday evening, I dined alone at the Admiralty. The foreign telegrams came in at short intervals in red boxes, which already bore the special label Subcommittee, denoting the precautionary period. The flow was quite continuous, and the impression produced on my mind, after reading for nearly an hour, was that there was still a chance of peace. Austria had accepted the conference, and intimate personal appeals were passing between the Tsar and the Kaiser. It seemed to me, from the order in which I read the series of telegrams, that at the very last moment Sir Edward Grey might succeed in saving the situation. So far no shot had been fired between the great powers. I wondered whether armies and fleets could remain mobilized for a space without fighting, and then demobilize. I had hardly achieved this thought when another Foreign Office box came in. I opened it and read, Germany has declared war on Russia. There was no more to be said. I walked across the Horse Guards parade and entered 10 Downing Street by the garden gate. I found the Prime Minister upstairs in the drawing-room. With him were Sir Edward Grey, Lord Haldane, and Lord Crewe. There may have been other ministers. I said that I intended instantly to mobilize the fleet, notwithstanding the Cabinet decision, and that I would take full responsibility to the Cabinet the next morning. The Prime Minister, who felt himself bound to the Cabinet, said not a single word, but it was clear from his look that he was quite content. As I walked down the steps of Downing Street with Sir Edward Grey, he said to me, "You should know I have just done a very important thing. I have told Cambon that we shall not allow the German fleet to come into the Channel." I went back to the Admiralty and gave forthwith the order to mobilize. We had no legal authority for calling up the naval reserves, as no proclamation had been submitted to His Majesty in view of the Cabinet decision, but we were quite sure that the fleet men would unquestionably obey the summons. This action was ratified by the Cabinet on Sunday morning, and the royal proclamation was issued some hours later. The Cabinet sat almost continuously throughout the Sunday, and up till luncheon time it looked as if the majority would resign. The grief and horror of so many able colleagues was painful to witness. But what could anyone do? In the luncheon interval I saw Mr. Balfour, a veritable rock in times like these, and learned that the Unionist leaders had tendered formally in writing to the Prime Minister their unqualified assurances of support. I returned to the Admiralty. We telegraphed to our commanders-in-chief. Today, August the 2nd, at 2:20, the following note was handed to the French and German ambassadors. It begins, "The British government will not allow the passage of German ships through the English Channel or the North Sea in order to attack the coasts of shipping of France." It ends, "Be prepared to meet surprise attacks." Meanwhile, events were influencing opinion hour by hour. When the Cabinet met on Sunday morning, we were in the presence of the violation of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg by German troops. In the evening, the German ultimatum to Belgium was delivered. The next day arrived the appeal of the King of the Belgians that the guaranteeing powers should uphold the sanctity of the treaty regarding the neutrality of Belgium. This last was decisive. By Monday, the majority of Mr. Asquith's colleagues regarded war as inevitable. Discussion was resumed on Monday morning in a different atmosphere, though it seemed certain that there would be numerous resignations. Before the Cabinet separated on Monday morning, Sir Edward Grey had procured a predominant assent to the principal points and the general tone of his statement to Parliament that afternoon. Formal sanction had already been given to the already completed mobilization of the fleet and to the immediate mobilization of the army. No decision had been taken to send an ultimatum to Germany or to declare war upon Germany, still less to send an army to France. These supreme decisions were never taken at any cabinet. They were compelled by the force of events and the rest of the authority of the Prime Minister. We repaired to the House of Commons to hear the statement of the Foreign Secretary. I did not know which of our colleagues had resigned, or what the composition of the war government would be. The aspect of the Assembly was awed, but resolute. No one could mistake its intention. Sir Edward Grey made his statement with the utmost moderation. In order that there should be no ground for future reproaches, he informed the House that the Germans were willing to comply with the British demand that no German warship should be sent into the English Channel. The sombre march of his argument carried this weighty admission forward in its stride. When he sat down, he was possessed in an overwhelming measure the support of the assembly. Neither he nor I could remain long in the house. Outside, I asked him, "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we shall send them an ultimatum to stop the invasion of Belgium within 24 hours. Some of the ministers still clung to the hope that Germany would comply with the British ultimatum and would arrest the onrush of her armies upon Belgium. As well recall the Avalanche as easily suspend in mid-career the great ship that has been launched and is sliding down the ways. Germany was already at war with Russia and France. It was certain that in 24 hours she would be at war with the British Empire also. All through the tense discussions of the cabinet, one had in mind another greater debate, which must begin when these were concluded. Parliament, the nation, the dominions, would have to be convinced that the cause was good, that the argument was overwhelming, and that the response would be worthy. I did not for a moment doubt, but it seemed that the enormous political task awaited us, and I saw in the mind's eye not only the crowded House of Commons, but the formidable assemblies of people throughout the land, requiring full and swift justification of the flaming action taken in their name. But such cares were soon dispersed. When the council doors had opened and ministers had come into the outer air, the British nation was already surging forward in its ancient valour, and the Empire had sprung to arms. At 5:50 p.m. we sent the following message. Admiralty to all ships. General message. The war telegram will be issued at midnight, authorizing you to commence hostilities against Germany. But in view of our ultimatum, they may decide to open fire at any moment. You must be ready for this. Now, after all the stress and convulsion of the preceding 10 days, there came to us at the Admiralty a strange interlude of calm. All the decisions had been taken, the ultimatum to Germany had gone. It must certainly be rejected. War would be declared at midnight. As far as we were able to foresee the event, all our preparations were made. Mobilization was complete. Every ship was at its station, every man at his post, and all over the world every British captain and admiral was on guard. It only remained to give the signal. What would happen then? It seemed that the next move lay with the enemy. What would he do? Had he some deadly surprise in store, some awful design, long planned and perfected, ready to explode upon us at any moment now? Would our ships in foreign waters be able to mark down their German antagonists? If so, morning would witness half a dozen cruiser actions in the outer seas. In the war room of the Admiralty, where I sat waiting, one could hear the clock tick. From Parliament Street came the murmurs of the crowd, but they sounded distant, and the world seemed very still. The tumult of the struggle for life was over. It was succeeded by the stillness of ruin and death. We were to awake in pandemonium. I had the odd sense that it was like waiting for an election result. The turmoil of the contest seemed finished. The votes were being counted, and in a few hours the announcement would be made. One could only wait. But for what a result! Although the special duties of my office made it imperative that I, of all others, should be vigilant and forward in all that related to the preparation of war, I claim that in my subordinate station I had in these years before the war done nothing wittingly or willingly to impair the chances of a peaceable solution, and had tried my best to make good relations possible between England and Germany better now. I thank God that I could feel also in that hour that our country was guiltless of all intended purpose of war. Even if we had made some mistakes in the handling of this awful crisis, though I did not know them, from the bottom of our hearts we could say that we had not willed it. Germany, it seemed, had rushed with head down and settled resolve to her own undoing. And if this were what she had meant all along, if this was the danger which had really menaced us hour by hour during the last 10 years, and would have hung over us hour by hour until the crash eventually came, was it not better that it should happen now that she had put herself so hopelessly in the wrong, now that we were ready, beyond the reach of surprise, now that France and Russia and Great Britain were all in the line together? The First Sea Lord and the Chief of Staff came in with French admirals who had hurried over to concert in detail arrangements for the cooperation of the two fleets in the Channel and in the Mediterranean. They were fine figures in uniform and very grave. One felt in actual contact with these French officers how truly the crisis was life or death for France. They spoke of basing the French fleet in Malta, that same Malta for which we had fought Napoleon for so many years, which was indeed the very pretext for the renewal of the war in 1803. Malta ou la guerre. Little did the Napoleon of St. Helena dream that in her most desperate need France would have at her disposal the great base which her strategic instinct had deemed vital. I said to the admirals, "Use Malta as if it were Toulon." The minutes passed slowly. Once more, now in the march of centuries, whole England was to stand forth in battle against the mightiest thrones and dominations. Once more, in the defence of the liberties of Europe and the common right, must she enter upon a voyage of great toil and hazard, across waters uncharted, towards coasts unknown, guided only by the stars. Once more, the far-off line of storm-beaten ships was to stand between the continental tyrant and the dominion of the world. It was 11 o'clock at night, 12 by German time, when the ultimatum expired. The windows of the Admiralty were thrown wide open in the warm night air. Under the roof which Nelson had received his orders were gathered a small group of admirals and captains and a cluster of clerks, pencil in hand, waiting. Along the Mall, from the direction of the palace, the sound of an immense concourse singing "God Save the King" floated in. On this deep wave there broke the chimes of Big Ben, and as the first stroke of the hour boomed out, a rustle of movement swept across the room. The war telegram, which meant "Commence hostilities against Germany," was flashed to the ships and establishments under the white ensigns all over the world. I walked across the Horse Guards parade to the Cabinet Room and reported to the Prime Minister and the ministers who were assembled that the deed was done.
brother, but he went away to do his bit the other day. With a smile on his lips and his lieutenant's upon his shoulder, bright and gay. As the train moved out, he said,